Welcome to The Voice of Retail for the week of June 24th, 2019. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, if you're a retailer in Canada, the name on your call display commanded your attention. Marina Strauss joins me today on her last day at the Globe and Mail as their veteran retail reporter as we turn the mic around with a look back at her rich career covering the retail beat, the state of retail in Canada, advice to retailers on dealing with the business media, and plans for the future. Next, live from the Purolator Podcasting Studio at Store 2019 in late May, an up-close interview with global retail strategist Carl Boutet, Chief Strategist and Board Advisor for Studio RX based in Montreal. We talk about his background in retail, travel to Egypt to share best retail practices, and views on the state of the retail nation in Canada and across North America. Next, we'll cover off retail this week with Untuckit expanding across Canada after posting knock the cover off the ball success at Sherway in Toronto, a look at shoppers on both sides of the border, Amazon steps up hiring for the Tawasin facility, Purolator's $1 billion investment rollout, Lululemon's Crops for Clothes back to school kicks off in the US now with Prime Day, breakfast at Tiffany's, head shops left behind, Longo's builds meals, chronicling grocery store format changes, and 5 key edible takeaways. Sorry, no free samples. But first, let's listen into my interview with Marina Strauss. Marina, welcome to The Voice of Retail. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Michael.
Well, it's a real treat. You and I have known each other for many years, and it's kind of fun for me to, so to speak, turn the microphone around and talk to one of the leading journalists in the business community, I think not just in Canada, but around the world. So I've really been looking forward to the time we're going to spend together. Why don't we start with a little bit about you? How did you get into the reporting business, the media business, and eventually your role covering the retail beat here at the Globe and Mail?
Well, it started way back in university. I was an editor at the Varsity, so a real passion. It was my hobby. I love journalism. It was a hobby that turned into my trade and my profession, so a true passion. And worked summers at the Montreal Gazette. Montreal Gazette was my first job. Number of areas, health, labor. Went to the Globe and Mail on the news side. Covered a lot of areas on the news side. Went to Quebec a lot because I spoke French. Covered the first Quebec referendum. Covered an inquiry into RCMP wrongdoing, and came back, covered Ottawa, really did a number of things, developed a justice beat, so really a lot of things. And eventually, after a maternity leave, coming back to the Globe was looking to broaden its readership in the business section, and they asked me to start writing features and a broader look at business and professions and careers, to bring in more women into the section, more accessibility in the writing. So I started to do that. It morphed into moving into consumer products, the cola wars, the beer wars. Those were the days that there were actual businesses here in those areas that did the work here in Canada. And marketing, and that morphed into retail. So it was a great background for retail. Often did touch on retail in many ways. So I got that business background. So it was almost by accident, you might say, but it was a great journey and gave me a really strong foundation in not only corporate takeovers, marketing, but really all aspects of business to prepare for this retail beat.
Well, it's you touch on a couple of things that remind me of many people I speak to, which is, they didn't really set their minds out to be retailers, but found themselves in this wonderful industry, or in your case, covering this industry. And just such a broad background brings, retail touches on so many different moving parts that it's great to have such a broad-based background. Let's talk about your trade craft, and I'm curious about the stories that you write. You've long form stories, whether they're in the Report on Business, some great stories on I remember the stories on Target and stories on Sears that really chronicle a nice long look and an in-depth look. So it feels like sometimes stories, I don't want to say drop on your lap, but kind of present themselves, right? So there's news about Hudson's Bay, or there's news about a particular retailer. But in other times, there's not really any news. How do you approach creating a story that covers retail when, again, some are obvious that you're going to kind of investigate news or updates that come from it, but as an industry, how do you frame your tradecraft?
Well, I would say number one, that's the value I hope I can add to the work, and that's a big value that the Globe puts on a journalist like me. It comes down to keeping in touch with people, talking to people, reaching out. Coffees, lunches, conferences, really keeping in touch with your contacts and talking to them, because sure, there's the news that presents itself, there's the press releases, there's the events, but really what I look for is what's happening behind the scenes. How can I give context to stories? And you really need to keep in touch with people in the industry or people on the fringes, the suppliers, the lawyers, the bankers.
Sure.
They know where the skeletons are. And, a good story, a story that our readers want to read, will not only give you the news, it'll give you some insights, it'll give you some context, and it'll answer not only what happened, but why and how. And, we look at these stories, I don't want to sound pretentious, but we try to really do case studies, especially when we do those longer stories. Really try to look at a situation and analyze it for our readers, because we have a pretty sophisticated readership, and they expect much more than just the surface information. And quite frankly, Michael, that's what I love to do. It was just part of my DNA to keep digging, keep finding out. It was just a basic curiosity. So that's how I do my trade. I just ask the questions. The questions were always fascinating to me. How does this work? Where did it start? Why?
Why did it happen? How did we get here? Kind of thing.
Exactly.
I think about your story. It's interesting because over the years, you and I have sat beside each other at conferences, and it's interesting with your lens about, well, I'm looking for something interesting to listen to, and you have to sit through a lot of conferences, I'm sure, and a lot of content to find something after a lot of experience. Oh, that's interesting. That might lead me in a place. But a lot of it is, knew that. That's, as you say, you have a sophisticated audience.
Well, luckily, I was also interested in the subject. Retailing is pretty interesting. It's a bit of an intersection of business and everyday life, and something that was very accessible to a broad readership, which was always my mandate from the beginning. When they put me into business, they really wanted to cater to a wider audience, and that's how I found a great way to do that. Retail, everybody could relate to retail, and yet there's a lot of sophisticated backroom work that's happening that needed to be looked into. So I found it a fascinating beat.
Well, that's a great segue. I wanted to get your advice for my listeners, for the retail trade. When they see your name come up on their call display or your counterparts, that laugh, it's funny. What's the best way to deal with or work with, I guess, better stated, business media? I mean, the media is interested in covering your story. Sometimes you're very interested in getting the story out. What's been your experience? What's the best way to work with people like yourself and counterparts in the
call.
business?
Running away from the media doesn't work these days. There's just too much transparency. There's too many other routes to publicize matters and issues. If there are any tensions, they'll usually surface. If they don't surface in the Globe and Mail, and hopefully Globe and Mail will get it first, they will surface. They'll come up in a tweet. They'll come up on Facebook, Instagram. A picture tells 1,000 words. There's no use hiding, and really the executives who were open with me. I think they got fair treatment, and they were able to tell their story. I really do think I let people tell their stories when I have access. Give access to the media. They're not out there to eat you up. They just want the information. And they're looking for the fair story. They're looking for the full story. I mean, transparency works both ways. We know as a journalist that if we run with a story that that has only one side or is just plain wrong or unfair, we hear about it in nanoseconds. It surfaces also. It works.
I guess
both
that comes
ways.
comes back to you as
right away. Right? It comes back and it goes very public. And journalists can be can feel the wrath of the public as much as a retailer can. So we're not looking to. We're looking for stories. We're just like the retailers are always telling me that they want to tell stories for their customers. Our readers are our customers, and they also want to hear stories. So the frustrating part is when my name comes up on somebody's ID call and they hesitate. That's when this dance starts. Oh, maybe we'll talk to you, but this will be off the record, and this will be background, and we can only say this. Tell me the story. Your customers are ready to accept that you're not 100% perfect. I'm not a PR agency anyways. They don't expect that from me, my readers. They want the full story. And I would hope that, and I think a growing number of retailers do realize this, and I certainly appreciate the access I've been given over the years, not from everybody, but I would say more and more I did get access, and I appreciated it, and I think our readers appreciate it, and I think everybody benefits. I think it's a win-win.
So in the course of the 20-plus years you've been covering this beat, there's been a lot of change in retail, though some things continue to remain the same. What have you seen that's changed in the retail industry here in Canada, or hasn't changed at all, or what observations do you have over time?
You know what? The basic theme has been an invasion of the incumbents, an invasion of retail. It started with the U.S. invasion, the U.S. retailers coming here, Home Depot, Walmart, one after another, mostly big box retailers. It was an invasion. I use that word often in my stories. Today, it's the same theme. A lot of it is, but today it's Amazon, the invasion of Amazon and the invasion of e-commerce. And obviously, the answer to your first question was e-commerce. Sure. That's what's changed, and we all know that. And it's not only in retail; it's everywhere. Retail has been hit hard by it, and interesting enough, the industry I'm in, media, has also been hit hard by it, and I think I've been able to learn a lot just by experiencing it myself in our own business, and I think that's made it, it's helped it to resonate for me and helped inform my own questioning and curiosity about it. It's happening everywhere, and looking at how retailers are responding is so interesting and so transferable as lessons for other industries, because other industries haven't been hit quite as hard. Others have been, and we're all learning from each other. And really, that's how I see my stories. They're lessons. It's business. You can learn from so much. So some things haven't changed much. I mean, look at Hudson's Bay. I'm in the middle of covering the privatization of Hudson's Bay.
The story that just keeps giving, right? I mean, my goodness.
Exactly. I was covering it, around 2000. 2005.
Well, you and I chatted in 2002. I looked this up, and you called me. I had just launched HBC.com, and you were doing a story on returns. And it was a great story because I love talking about returns because it's if you don't do returns right as a retailer, particularly as an online retailer, you're in big trouble, and you kind of had figured that out. And I was talking about a bike helmet that I had ordered from Sport Check at the time, and it arrived and it was all dented. And I'm like, oh, couldn't you they literally picked it off the shelf, put it in a box, and sent it to me. And I was relaying that I called them, and they took care of the problem in a second. So it was funny. I don't think I told you this. As soon as I got off the phone with you, I rang up my counterpart at Sport Check. I'm like, listen, I just told what I think is a good story for you, but you're probably going to be in the paper. And he goes, oh, okay. So, back to 2000, 2002, right?
So some things have not changed a lot. Returns is still a huge issue for retailers, especially in e-commerce, and they're still grappling with what's the most efficient, cost-effective way to deal with returns, especially with more apparel and shoe e-commerce today. That's evolved a lot. So the themes are often the same, but the iterations are a bit different, and that's another reason I've just been able to delve into this area so much. I have the background, and funny enough, the more you think that you know, the more you realize you don't know.
For sure.
And that's really kept me going also, just to keep on learning. I've been learning all along. It's been, never stopped learning.
Well, you had a big announcement recently, and it was interesting to me. You announced you're going to be retiring from the Globe and Mail, so we'll talk about that. And it was interesting to me to watch the reaction from various, you had a great reaction on you tweeted. I mean, if I would sum it up. I
tweeted, I went on Facebook, I LinkedIn. This was a modern retirement.
This is a modern retirement announcement. It's not a tombstone location thing in the Globe and Mail. But the response, if I summed it all up, was gonna miss you, because generally it's fair, tough, but informed journalism. So generally, I think the industry. I know Deanne Briesbach from Retail Council Canada did that kind of tweet. Essentially, is like, we're going to miss that kind of informed journalism. But let's talk about you. What's next for you after such an interesting life, covering an interesting beat? Well,
there'll probably be some more writing I'll do on retailing. I'm not leaving the area at all. I've already been asked to do some writing in it. And
is there a book in your future, perhaps?
Perhaps a book, perhaps on Hudson's Bay. It's a remarkable company, our oldest retailer. So a lot of history, a lot of personalities there, a lot of characters, and a lot of business intrigue over the years. Maybe I can interview you for that one. So lots of possibilities. I'd like to do some volunteer work for some journalism associations. I really believe in journalism today more than ever. I always did. I always thought it was important to have an independent voice overseeing various areas of life and business. So there's a number of journalism associations, foundations that I plan to be active in, just to get that message out that journalism matters.
Yes.
And I've got 2 out of 3 of my kids are getting married this year. There's lots coming
exciting.
up. So I'm very excited for the next chapter. I've got a lot of options, and I think it's a good time to just look at doing things a little differently.
Yep.
But I'll be looking at retail.
You'll be around.
Still.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure many of us look forward to seeing your name continue on the call display when you call and continue to chat. When are you wrapping up here at the Globe and Mail?
Officially at the end of this week, so June 28th.
Oh, I got you right at the end of the week. Wow.
That's right. But I'll be around, probably still be on the Globe email, and have a few tasks to finish off. And but officially, June 28th, that's it. I'm out.
And otherwise, I guess folks who are listening might get in touch with you on LinkedIn. I think you're on
For sure.
LinkedIn, so there's a way to kind of keep in touch with you and
For
keep
sure.
up to date. Fantastic.
Yes, and I hope I do keep in touch with people. It was all about the people who provided me with the feedback. I appreciated all the feedback, all the insights, all the time people gave me to really learn more about their companies, about the industry, about related industry. It was something I appreciated a lot and really helped me make my stories better.
Well, on behalf of the industry, if I can be so bold, thank you for your contribution to the retail industry in Canada. I think it was much valued. We're going to miss you, but it's great to hear that we're not really going to miss you, that you're still going to be around covering the industry. So thanks again for joining me on The Voice of Retail, and have a great week. Big parties coming up, I'm sure, as you as you leave from these doors. But again, best of luck for whatever comes next.
Thank you, Michael.
Carl, welcome to the Purolator Podcast Studio at Store 2019. How are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic.
Well, listen, you and I have known each other for quite a while, but for the listeners of the Voice of Retail podcast, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today. Your role is advising some of the most senior leaders in retail. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks. So I spent the better part of 10 years doing what I call my hard knocks retail school, doing store-in-store for Costco. Basically launching their first wave of mobile, and then some ancillary technologies as well, but focused on mobile. A thing back in the day you might remember called Cantel.
Oh, I remember them.
Remember that?
That was Rogers, right? Ted Rogers' Great Adventure, right? The board. I remember I was a Rogers employee, and the great story about Ted was that he said, I've seen this new thing, and the board didn't believe him. Even his wife didn't back him, so he started Cantel, right, separately from Rogers.
Yeah. So he was an amazing innovator, and on the technology side, he had one challenge though, is that all his money was tied up in the technology, and he had no money for the retail. So he basically had to partner with groups that would become master franchisors, and I was part of one of those groups. And just by some interesting circumstances, this opportunity with Price Club back in the day.
Yeah.
So Cantel Price Clubs, and we're dating this already a bit, back to the mid-late 90s. So ramped that up, opened 65 locations as a business owner as well, a partner and managing director. Learned a lot about operations, the discipline at Costco. So I was not a Costco employee per se. It was my business, but I was in their home.
Sure.
And I was frontline with them. I was actually their first external. We were the first external company that allowed them to have our own staff, like it wasn't Costco staff. So it was a really good learning experience. Actually helped them. I was part of the team that launched e-com as well for Costco, more on the logistics side, because again, for them, it was this idea of drop shipping in 2004 was really like, how do we do this? They're very good at pallets. So as soon as things got away from pallets, they had a tendency to come to us and see how we could help them. So so that was a really good, and saw this massive business grow at a really strong pace. The Canadian market was always been very good to Costco. And then I really flipped and basically went to support, take that knowledge and launched a consulting career supporting independent retailers. And did that with Mega Group for better part of almost 7 years.
No, that's a furniture buying,
right.
What would you call it, conglomerate or co-op?
It's a co-op. I mean, it's not legally a co-op, but they have the co-op law. They're owned by their members. And it's 800, mainly furniture, appliance, and electronics. And they got into some other categories. But the reality of the independent retailer, what are the struggles? So having seen the Costco side of what they were up against, and then saying, okay, how do they remain relevant and mainly secondary and even some tertiary markets. So very different reality, but really interesting. So their whole digital transformations and helping them better understand and creating new concepts. So again, fantastic learning experience. And then for the past almost 3 years, back really fully independent. My time is evenly split right now between Cloudraker, which was a first generation digital marketing agency. It was did like the first websites for Bell, and now is taking more retail focus because they're part of this group called Tavia, which is out of France, which is Carrefour's marketing extension or marketing agency, and now global. And then the other part of my time is with the Bensadoun School, which I'm always excited to talk about because it's a super inspiring opportunity there to form and to train or educate tomorrow's retail leaders.
And that's at McGill University, right?
At McGill University. So the first class, the first concentration class launched last fall. This coming year we'll be launching a master's. And
it's exciting to see, right? More formal programs, more education, because for a long time there was not such in place, right? You had a couple of schools who were doing it, but you didn't have...
Yeah, so the difference...
certainly didn't have a master's per se,
No,
right?
so the big difference with this program is it's an actual school, meaning that it's not just a concentration within the marketing, which most others are. There's a certificate or there's something. Yeah. So you do a couple of classes or focus more on retail. This is an actual full program, which and the most exciting part for me is the multidisciplinary aspect. I think it speaks really to where, as an industry, we need to focus beyond the marketing and the merchandising and the finance and look at sustainability, look at health and wellness, look at design thinking, look at, so incorporating, and McGill has a very diverse academic, background, so it can pull the best researchers in all these fields.
So I want to get back to talking about that, because I want to get back to your observations of retail and how it's evolved and what it takes to compete. Now, you also travel the world and speak, and you just got back from, I was reading online, just got back from Egypt and Cairo.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. How did that come up, and what was that like?
Yeah, so it was fascinating. I mean, how did it come up? I mean, I guess just through my network, somebody reached out and said, we're doing this first ever retail summit for Egypt. I'm like, well, Egypt, okay. I mean, we all have the same images that conjure up into our mind about what Egypt should be like, and and pyramids and mummies and all that stuff. But when I started looking into actually what's happening there, and there's 100 million people in this country, and Chartered Bank predicted that by 2030 it would be the 7th largest economy in the world.
Wow, I had no idea.
Surpassing Germany and Japan. So when you think of market opportunity, and we see what happened in China, what's happening in India, and these large economies, they get an opportunity when they grow like this to leapfrog.
Right.
So it was really, I was walking on and saying, okay, what is it that they can just go right over? Like, what is it, what part? So, for instance, one of the ministers that was there was proud to announce that they were just getting into business registries. They even had business registry in Egypt.
It's an interesting concept, is if you were to start all over again from... not nothing, but if you were to start all over again, what would you do different?
With 100 million people, an average age of 22.
Young country.
Still growing at like 5 to 10%. That's why this 2030 prediction is really, really based on demographics. It's the fact that it's still a poor country. The difference maybe with Egypt compared to like a China or whatever, what makes it a little more complicated is it was once a rich country.
Yes.
The jewel of the Nile.
Yeah.
So there is that lingering, but they know they got to pivot. The government's making these big investments around creating 14 brand new cities.
14 new cities
and a new administrative capital. So it's like they created an Ottawa.
Wow.
Because they to pull out Cairo is 20 million people. It's busting at the seams.
Sure. So
they got to create these 14 new cities, and when you're in that part of the world, water is a big issue. Yeah. So they have to irrigate. They have to put all the infrastructure in. So these are greenfields, literally. So there are questions like, how do we build the best new commercial centers? Like how do we think about commercial? Fascinating. For these 14 cities, because we need to get people to want to go to these cities and start their lives up again. In a whole new place, same country but new place. So there's a lot of really interesting opportunities happening there, and the way they're thinking about it. I mean, they have their issues as well, but sure. But it's exciting, very, very exciting.
So that's an interesting segue, because it triangulates to what the school at McGill is working on and what your observations are. What in your career has been some of the things that have changed for retailers? Like that, it's one of those like a good consultant question: start, stop. How many stops and how many starts? What are those things?
So I think the way I was really alluding to at the school and the multidisciplinary approach, and this came from Mr. Bensadoun, who donated the money to launch his school. Is like my business today. The
founder of
Aldo Shoes, right? Aldo Bensadoun, and he said my business is way more complex than pricing and merchandising. I need data scientists. I need to understand environmental impacts. I need all these things. So how do I find that talent. And I think that's our biggest complexity right now, is we can't just be good. Before you had good or great product at a good or great price and a good or great location, you were going to make it.
You do okay, right? Yeah, you do
now
okay.
Now the touch points are so much more complex, and just being able to maintain and stay on top. And our biggest challenge, I think, is our linear thinking, is the fact that we're trying to see, we try to project out and understand these things as they go in a very linear fashion when we're anything but linear right now. The acceleration is really
geometric in some.
Oh yeah, exponential. It's exponential, and exponential more than just 15% year-over-year e-com growth. I think that's we sort of see this nice linear trajectory when we see that, and say, okay, well, we can adjust to that. The reality is that that's not what you're adjusting to. You're adjusting to the digital influence, which is way more than the 15%.
Right.
And to adjust to that digital influence is an iterative mindset that we're, as an industry, I think, really struggling to come to grasp with. And then where you're seeing these big acquisitions like Walmart acquiring Jet and $3 billion, they're not acquiring. They're acquiring talent. I mean, that's what these the retailers are trying to, is how we get these skill sets, how do we get, more importantly, these mindsets.
And you mentioned Walmart. I think they present a good case study of how to do it well. They seem to have ingested Jet and it really ingested the culture and the people, and have really done.
Absolutely.
If you think about their performance in the last year, I mean, their .com performance is outstanding, and I think you're right. I think that attributes that to a new culture. I mean, if you go back 20 years, Walmart's .com was a JV with SoftBank, and it was it felt separate from the business.
Yeah.
And the performance, I think they got lapped, really.
Absolutely.
But, that's not the case anymore. And people often ask me who the next Amazon is. I often say, well, Amazon's the next Amazon, by the way. They're not done.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Walmart is really making impressive strides.
I think their openness to try new things, this IRL lab that they have right now, the figure that blows my mind out of that lab is, I believe it's every minute. It might be even every second. There's 1.6 terabytes of data.
Wow.
I believe that was 100 servers in the back.
Yeah.
So let's say every second, just to make the point here, that 1.6 terabytes of data that they're pulling out of this 60,000 square foot store, it's not even a full footprint for
Incredible.
that, is 3.5 years worth of music. So it would take you 3.5 years to listen to what they're seeing in 1 second.
It's a good startling factoid, by the way. I love that factoid.
It's crazy. So but their mindset, what are they going to do with that, is obviously way more data that they're going to ever figure out but just the fact that they're doing it is already super impressive.
So you're based in Montreal, and I wanted to talk just in the last kind of couple of minutes we have together. The Montreal retail economy is doing very well.
Absolutely.
I was looking at numbers; they're up 8% year over year in March. Last Stats Canada numbers. What do you attribute that to? I think Quebec had a long period of not so great growth.
Yeah.
We've seen tremendous investment in infrastructure, for example. That's every time I go to Montreal, I almost don't recognize the path from the airport anymore. But it's really good days in retail for Quebec, I feel.
Yeah, I think there's been, it's a reinvestment. There's still a lot going on. The project I'm probably most excited about right now is the Eaton Center on St. Catherine Street. This basically was gutted.
Yep.
And the anchor is going to be a timeout market. It's this really innovative food concept, which is this, high-end, let's think about it as a high-end food court, but with all sorts of entertainment, cooking classes. Like, Timeout is originally from London, but Lisbon is really where they got their start. They just opened their first one in North America in Miami. Their second one is going to be in Montreal this fall. So that's I think, going to shift what's happening with St. Catherine Street. Now, St. Catherine Street is actually being dug up right now. So I don't know.
That's been many months of.
Yeah, months of years probably. So and then there's this other project that's always getting ready to start, is Royal Mount, which is a carbon layout project. I'd say now the latest number is it's $1.5 billion commercial, the largest project in Canada. That the land is there. They just got to knock down some buildings, and at the busiest intersection in Montreal, at the corner of DeCarry and Metropolitan. So
if listeners want to get a hold of you and learn more about you, how do they get a hold of you, Carl?
Carl Boutet, Carl with a C, Boutet. You find me on LinkedIn or pretty much any other social media network. I'm pretty easy to find.
Well, fantastic. Thanks for joining me today in the Voice of Retail and in the Purolator Podcast Studio here at Store 2019. I wish you well and safe travels.
Thank you so much, Michael.
All right, thanks to Marina and Carl for being my special guests for this episode. Now let's hit the highlights from Retail This Week e-newsletter, biggest retail weekly in Canada. You can subscribe on retailcouncil.org for free. I put that together each and every week, 51 weeks of the year, and cover off the top stories in retail news in Canada and around the world. Kicking off with Untuckit, launches multi-store Canadian expansion. This is from Retail Insider. If you're not familiar with Untuckit, they got about 50 stores in the U.S. I had no idea this retailer existed until my good friend and listener Dean Perry, now from Atomic Reach. We were traveling together in Soho, actually, and we found Untuckit. He had already been buying stores. So it's men's shirts, and I think they also have women's now as well, that is meant to be untucked, as the saying goes. But, it's funny. I thought it was, what a niche. How successful can this be? Well, as it turns out, not only were they successful in general, they've got Wayne Gretzky as their brand ambassador. And when they opened up in Canada, it was a wild success. Their Sherway location turned out to be their number one performing store in December out of all 50 stores in the U.S. So clearly that pointed in the direction of Canadian expansion. So congratulations to the folks at Untuckit. Some interesting research from Strategy Magazine, courtesy of Strategy, around Canadian versus American shoppers. If you're a retailer, there's a difference if you work on both sides of the border. If you have vendors who work on both sides of the border, there's a difference in Canadian consumer as much as, there's a Canadian consumer versus an American consumer. But in general, we know there's some differences. This article highlights that Canadians are a skeptical bunch. I've always talked about Canadians being a measure twice, cut once consumer. This says 43% versus 33% of Americans agree with the statement, "I'm skeptical of the effectiveness of all-in-one products." Anyway, some great research. One of those good research pieces that confirms what we already know, and a few interesting, surprising facts. So check that out. Amazon increases hiring. So Tawasin, they've got another one of their giant warehouses opening up in Tawasin on the West Coast. And they're looking to hire 700 workers to staff that site, and now that estimate is written to about 800. So they're starting to hire in September and/or October. That from Business in Vancouver. From National Post, the catcher's mitt of packages. Purolator eyes a U.S. market $1 billion investment rollout. So big announcements here from Purolator this week. John Ferguson, their great president, actually there's a video here of an interview with him with BNN as well. Check that out. He's going from 50,000 packages processing to 150,000 packages processing per hour. There's a lot of things to unravel in this announcement. It's a big investment over a number of years, so check that out. That from the National Post and BNN. You want to check out the video from BNN. From the Star, talking about Lululemon looking to pea-based pants as the next frontier, so looking beyond cotton and beyond some of the tech fibers, and they're looking at different initiatives. Lululemon, you can count on them technically always being in the lead or being ahead. A reminder that Retail Conditions seminar for members, the spring edition happens on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday. That's a report I put together for the members only, Retail Council of Canada members, that chits and chats with quick interviews with C-level executives across the country and kind of takes the pulse of retail. In this edition, we talked about how business was up until just after May 2-4 weekend. Again, so if you remember, check that out. Let's see. In around the world, retail delivery wars. So it's interesting, and in article in Forbes and starts to talk about Prime Day. So Prime Day, Amazon's Prime Day has been expanded to a couple of days. And there's two schools of thought around what to do about Prime Day. School of thought one is to ignore it, because by participating in Prime Day as a different retailer, you basically validate Prime Day and make it into a bigger thing than it already is. Other school of thought, and certainly eBay has taken that approach, let's take them head on and let's compete against them. And it looks like Target and Walmart are also going to be doing that in the U.S. So, the question, though, is this just a big race to the bottom? I mean, does it just move up Black Friday, not Black Friday, but does it just wind up moving up back to school up to, late, earlier in the summer? So I think it's July 15th that's going to be happening. So check that out, article from Forbes magazine, featuring some great commentary there from a number of different folks. Lunch at Barney's, breakfast at Tiffany's. This is from CNBC. This is an interesting article highlighting the importance now that restaurants have in not grocery stores, but in department stores. And if you've ever been to the Nordstrom's, they've got a great restaurant. Basili Restoration Hardware, or RW's, got a great restaurant that they run themselves. So this is kind of an old concept come around to be a new concept. Breakfast at Tiffany's, a classic movie that captured the time, but that time seems to have returned. Now, whether it's both traffic driving or whether that's also a little bit of margin. I mean, Craig Patterson talked about how malls are creating bespoke food courts or food districts as traffic drivers. So maybe there's a little bit of both tucked into there. Dress Barn announces first closures. They're closing 650 stores in the U.S. by 2020. Not a big name in Canada. It's kind of an unfamiliar name to most, but Dress Barn, is one of those, so to speak, niche retailers, but it looks like they're going to shut down pretty much all of their locations, 650 locations. So I think, caught up in the changing times. Article here from the New York Times on just all about Walmart has its tracking checkout. It's tracking theft at their checkout with AI-powered cameras in 1,000 stores. So we'll see a lot more of that, I'm sure, leveraging the predictive power of AI and, gathering all that data and just looking for anomalies. Great article, moving on to retail news for entrepreneurs. Bookstores find growth as anchors of authenticity. So that's so interesting, right? Because at one point it's kind of ebbed and flowed. The superstores were going to take out and wiped out a lot of small community bookstores. But this one, this article highlights that big chains once posed a threat, but indies are thriving by hosting events, adding non-bookstore merchandise, becoming community hubs. So we see that in ways large and small. I mean, Indigo positions itself and merchandise certainly as a cultural department store, knowing that books may or may not be enough, and hosting authors, so indies can participate in that as well. Also in entrepreneurs, the head shops left behind by cannabis legislation. So if you page back a couple episodes in the Economist Cannabis Edition, I talked to Robin Ellens from The Friendly Stranger, longtime supporter of the culture and to a fair degree responsible for the legalization of cannabis, but now kind of being left on the outside because you can't roll in cannabis into a head shop, and now cannabis stores can carry head shop material, but not the other way around, if you know what I mean. So this from the Edmonton Journal. So good exploration of that bit of a thorny issue, and hopefully we'll work to get that resolved over time. Great entrepreneurs, and by all means shouldn't not be left behind. Spotlighting grocery retail. So there's a great article here from Canadian Retailer on the kind of a summary article on the different formats of grocery that have evolved and that have presented themselves. So that's a great overview article. Article from Supermarket News. Longo is building a build-your-own meals under the pilot at their Maple Leaf Square store here in Toronto. They have a central kiosk, and basically you build a meal kit is basically what it is, with your protein and your meats and starches and garnishes. And, it's interesting because it addresses one of the shortcomings of meal kits, which is it's a fixed, you either like it or you don't. It's a fixed product, and you're a little constrained, I suppose, in a home-delivered meal kit in one way. But this is Longo's approach to saying, well, let's try something different. Let's try to leverage our existing base and, acquire meal kit, basically, meal kit buyers and allow them the ultimate range, not ultimate, but a nice way to customize their own meal kit on the go. So good luck to Longo's. We'll be keeping a close eye on that. 5 key takeaways from the Future of Edibles Roundtable. So this is from the Globe and Mail, and this is Sylvain Charlebois, who we've talked to before on the podcast. So look back a couple of episodes. We had a couple of conversations, one of which was about edibles. Sylvain's very famous for talking about how Canadians were expecting a big party, but they wound up with a boring party in a basically in a basement with no balloons. So anyway, he just covers off a couple of interesting things about expectations and about how the government is operating, and even some gaps in the regulatory framework between Health Canada and the CFIA, Consumer Food Inspection Agency, on edibles. So it's a really interesting read, both for grocers and also for those in the cannabis space. And Toonies for Tummies doubles the store count thanks to Empire. So Empire, which is Sobeys et al., has come on board. They went from 550 to 1,100 stores. So they're really doing a great job of expanding that very worthwhile charity that feeds tummies, feeds young kids who are looking for a meal. So that's a wrap on this edition of The Voice of Retail. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. You can also ask your favorite home devices, Amazon Echo, Google Home, to play the most recent edition. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of M.E. LeBlanc Company, Inc., and you can learn more about me on www.meleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a great week.